It was a Friday night, cold and raining, the kind of night that usually made me feel cozy indoors. My roommate, Sarah, was visiting her parents for the weekend, leaving me with the entire house to myself. I remember thinking how nice it would be to have some quiet time, maybe catch up on a book I'd been meaning to read. Around 10 p.m., I locked the back door, double-checked the front, and settled onto the couch with a cup of tea, the wind rattling the old windows. Our house was a little isolated at the end of a long gravel driveway, so any sound from outside usually stood out. I was halfway through a chapter when I heard it, a faint scrape from what sounded like the kitchen. I froze, tea mug halfway to my lips. It was probably just the house settling, I told myself, or a branch hitting the roof. The wind was really picking up. I tried to focus on my book again, but a knot of unease had started to form in my stomach. A few minutes later, there was another sound, this one clearer, a soft thump, like something heavy had been set down, followed by a slight creak, the floorboards in the hall, just outside the kitchen. My heart started to pound. Sarah always left the kitchen light on when she went away, and I hadn't turned it off yet. I could see a sliver of light under the kitchen door from where I sat. No, I thought I could. Now it looked like the light was off. I stood up slowly, every muscle tense. The house was dead silent now, except for the rain lashing against the windows. I crept towards the kitchen, my bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The sliver of light was definitely gone. I reached the doorway and hesitated, my hand hovering over the light switch. Taking a deep breath, I flicked it on. The kitchen was empty. Everything looked normal. The back door was still locked, the deadbolt thrown. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. That's when I saw it. On the counter, right next to the sink, was a small, muddy footprint. Not a shoe print, more like a bare foot, or perhaps a socked foot, tracked in from outside. My blood ran cold. The window above the sink was slightly ajar, the lock visibly damaged, pried open. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on that window. Someone had been inside. They were still here. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was on the coffee table in the living room, too far away. I needed to get out. As I turned, I heard a floorboard groan directly above me in my bedroom. He was upstairs. My heart was a drum in my chest, a frantic beat that felt like it would give me away. I moved as quietly as I could, aiming for the front door, which was closer than the back. I had to get outside, into the rain, and run to old Mr. Henderson's house next door. I was almost to the living room when I heard the quick, heavy thud of footsteps descending the stairs. He was coming down. There was no time to make it to the front door without him seeing me. My eyes darted around the room, desperate. The small coat closet next to the entryway. It was my only chance. I threw myself inside, pulling the door shut behind me, the air instantly thick with the smell of old coats and mothballs. I pressed myself against the back wall, barely breathing, listening. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, then stopped. He was in the living room. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards as he moved, slowly, methodically. Then, the distinct sound of sniffing. He was close, too close. My eyes were wide in the darkness, tears silently streaming down my face. I heard a slight rustle, then a low, guttural grunt. The closet door suddenly ripped open. A dark shape filled the doorway, a human silhouette against the dim light of the living room. I screamed, a strangled sound that barely left my throat, and lunged forward, not thinking, just reacting. I pushed past him, scrambling out of the closet and toward the front door. My hand fumbled for the deadbolt, my fingers numb. He was right behind me. I heard his heavy breath, felt a hand grab a handful of my hair, yanking my head back violently. Pain exploded through my scalp. I screamed again, louder this time, and somehow, through sheer panic, I twisted, bringing my elbow back and connecting with something soft. He grunted, and his grip loosened for a split second. It was all I needed. I pulled the door open and stumbled out into the pouring rain, barefoot and screaming for help, running towards Mr. Henderson's house, not looking back. The porch light flickered on behind me, illuminating the open doorway of my house, dark and empty. When the police finally arrived, they found muddy footprints leading from my kitchen window, through the house, and stopping abruptly at the front porch. They followed them down the gravel driveway, where they just vanished into the muddy tracks of what looked like a car that had been parked just beyond the tree line. They found no one, but the window screen was carefully cut, not broken. He hadn't broken in randomly, he'd cut it beforehand. He knew where the cameras weren't. He had been planning it. And the worst part, my small, framed photo from my nightstand, the one of me and Sarah smiling, was gone. It felt like he took a piece of me, a reminder that he was still out there, that he knew who I was. And I had no idea why. It was late August, and the city heat was oppressive, so I jumped at the chance to spend a week at my aunt and uncle's house in the countryside. They were away on a cruise, and I'd offered to house sit, water the plants, and generally keep an eye on the place. The house was an old farmhouse, surrounded by fields and woods, miles from the nearest town. Beautiful during the day, but as dusk settled that first evening, the isolation started to feel a little heavy. Around 11 p.m., after a quiet dinner and a bit of reading, I locked up tight, checked all the windows, and headed to bed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets outside. I must have drifted off, but sometime later, a sound jolted me awake. It was faint, like a scraping noise coming from downstairs. My first thought was a branch rubbing against the house, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I lay still, my heart thumping against my ribs. It stopped. I waited, straining my ears, but heard nothing. Just as I was convincing myself it was nothing, a distinct creak echoed from the living room, directly below my bedroom. It was the sound of the old floorboards groaning under weight. Someone was in the house. My breath hitched. I slowly, carefully, slid out of bed, my feet meeting the cold wooden floor. Every shadow in the room seemed to deepen, to take on menacing shapes. I tiptoed to the bedroom door, pressing my ear against the cool wood. Silence. Then a soft clink, like metal on glass, came from the kitchen. It was followed by a muffled thud, as if something had fallen. Panic started to set in. I needed to call someone, but my phone was downstairs on the kitchen counter, where I'd left it charging. My only option was to get out. The back door was closer, but it opened onto the secluded backyard. The front door led directly to the driveway and the road, my best chance. I crept out of my room, moving as silently as possible down the hallway. Each step was agony, the old house groaning and creaking with every movement I made. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard it again, the creak from the living room, closer this time, accompanied by a low shuffle. My blood ran cold. He was moving towards the stairs. I ducked back into the shadows of the hallway, pressing myself against the wall, my eyes wide and fixed on the darkness below. A figure emerged from the living room, a tall, dark silhouette against the faint light filtering in from the front windows. He was moving slowly, deliberately, his head tilted as if listening. He started to ascend the stairs. My heart was in my throat. He was coming up. There was nowhere to hide upstairs. I looked wildly around, my eyes landing on the small linen closet at the far end of the hall. It was a stupid idea, but it was the only idea. As he took another slow step up, I bolted. I burst into a sprint, throwing open the linen closet door and scrambling inside, pulling the door shut just as his footsteps reached the top of the stairs. I held my breath, squeezed between stacks of old towels, listening to the agonizingly slow steps approach. They stopped right outside the closet. I could hear his heavy breathing, the soft whisper of fabric as he shifted. Then the doorknob rattled, gently at first, then more firmly. He was trying it. The old knob creaked, and a sliver of light appeared as the door began to open. I screamed a raw, primal sound, and threw myself forward, pushing against the door with all my might. The sudden movement caught him off guard. I heard a surprised grunt, and I burst out of the closet, shoving past his body and tearing down the stairs. As I hit the third step, his hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of my hair. Pain exploded through my scalp, and I cried out, losing my balance. My feet tangled, and I tumbled down the last few steps, hitting the floor hard. My head slammed against the wood, sending a jolt of pain through me, but the adrenaline was too high to truly register it. I scrambled to my feet, half crawling, half stumbling towards the front door. I didn't look back. I just ran. I fumbled with the locks on the front door, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the deadbolt. A loud thud from behind me told me he was coming down the stairs fast. Finally, the door gave way, and I burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath, not caring about the gravel digging into my bare feet. I sprinted across the driveway and into the long field, running towards the faint glow of the distant main road, screaming for help until my voice was hoarse. I kept running until I collapsed, sobbing, at the side of the road, where a passing truck eventually found me. The police searched the house later. Nothing was missing, no clear signs of forced entry other than the living room window, which was found slightly ajar, the screen neatly cut around the latch. They found a single muddy boot print on the kitchen floor, much larger than my foot. And on my aunt's antique writing desk, near the window, they found a small, neatly folded piece of paper. On it, scrawled in neat, almost elegant handwriting, were only 2 words: "You're next." They never found out who it was. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that he wasn't after things, but after me. It was late November, and the days were already short, plunging the old cabin into darkness by late afternoon. My parents had inherited the place from my grandparents, a small, rustic cabin deep in the Redwood National Park. They usually only visited in the summer, but this year they'd decided to spend Thanksgiving there, and I, being a college student on break, got roped into going early to open it up and make sure everything was all right. They'd arrive in a few days. The cabin had no cell service, no internet, just a landline that usually worked. I wasn't thrilled about being alone in the middle of nowhere, especially with the way the wind howled through the trees at night, but I figured I'd just read and enjoy the quiet. The first night was uneventful, just me, the crackling fire, and the constant whisper of the wind outside. It was the second evening, as I was making dinner, that I started feeling a bit off. I kept getting this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I'd glance out the kitchen window into the encroaching darkness, but see nothing but the dense wall of trees. Later, as I was washing dishes, I heard a faint snap from the woods behind the cabin, like a twig breaking underfoot. My hand froze in the dishwater. It was too distinct to be an animal, too heavy. I waited, holding my breath, but the sound didn't repeat. I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but the unease lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. The next morning, the unease solidified into something more concrete. I went out to the old shed to get some firewood. The shed had a rusty padlock, which I distinctly remembered latching the night before. Now it was unlatched and hanging open. My heart jumped. I pulled it shut, my hands trembling slightly, and hurried back to the cabin. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I hadn't properly locked it, but I was always meticulous about locking up. That afternoon, as I was reading by the living room window, I saw it. A faint, barely visible impression in the mud near the edge of the woods, a clear boot print. It was too big to be mine, and too distinct to be an animal. Someone had been there. They had been watching. That night, I didn't bother trying to relax. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I kept the lights on, the curtains drawn. Around midnight, the soft creak came from the porch. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was here. I heard a soft scrape against the wood of the front door, a distinct scratching sound. He was trying to get in. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast iron skillet from the kitchen, and backed into the narrow hallway, my breathing shallow and ragged. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, guttural grunt. Then a sudden, thunderous crash. The old front door splintered inwards, torn from its hinges, revealing a hulking, shadowed figure standing in the doorway, framed by the darkness outside. He stepped inside, his silhouette filling the entire frame. I didn't wait. With a terrified scream, I swung the skillet as hard as I could. It connected with something solid, his arm, maybe his shoulder, and I heard a sharp yelp of pain. The figure stumbled backward, giving me the precious seconds I needed. I bolted, not towards the broken front door, but towards the back, the small, rarely used back entrance that led to the utility room. My legs burned as I ran, fumbling with the deadbolt. It was stiff, almost rusted shut. I could hear his heavy footsteps pounding through the living room, coming for me. "You little bitch," a raspy voice snarled from behind me, thick with rage. The deadbolt finally clicked open. I burst out into the freezing night, sprinting blindly into the dark woods behind the cabin, not caring about the sharp branches tearing at my skin. I ran until my lungs burned, until I could no longer hear his furious shouts. I eventually stumbled onto a seldom-used logging road, miles from the cabin. It was hours before a passing hunter found me, shivering and incoherent. The police arrived, but they found no one at the cabin. The front door was indeed shattered, ripped from its frame, and there was a clear, deep gouge on the doorframe, consistent with a heavy tool. They found a large, bloody handprint on the kitchen counter, near where I'd grabbed the skillet. But the most disturbing detail came the next day, after my parents had arrived and were helping the police survey the damage. Tucked under the doormat, outside the back door, the one I'd escaped through, was a small, crudely carved wooden figurine. It was a little doll, made from twigs and dried leaves, bound together with twine. And pinned to its chest, with a rusty nail, was a single, long strand of my hair. They never caught anyone. But the hair, the boot print, the unlatched shed, the way he seemed to know I was there and where to find me, it wasn't random. It felt like he wasn't just an intruder. He'd been watching me, planning it, for longer than I could ever have imagined. And the chill that settles over me when the wind blows just right, whispering through the trees, is the same chill I felt that night.